Let's begin with something most men never stop to think about. There is a small, almost invisible mistake that happens in one of the most common interactions between a man and a woman. A hug seems harmless, routine, even insignificant. But in reality, that brief moment of physical contact can send a powerful message, one that is received instantly and emotionally rather than logically. And here's the truth. Most men are completely unaware of what their hug is actually communicating. Let's place this in a familiar setting. Imagine a 34-year-old man named Ryan living in Austin, Texas. He meets a woman named Lauren at a friend's weekend barbecue. The atmosphere is relaxed. Music playing softly, people chatting, drinks in hand. Everything feels easy and natural. At some point, as they greet each other, Ryan leans in for a hug. It lasts maybe 2 seconds. Nothing unusual, right? But what Ryan doesn't realize is that in those 2 seconds, Lauren's mind has already processed something much deeper than he intended. Not through conscious thought, but through instinct. Through feeling. This is where most men misunderstand human connection. They assume attraction or comfort builds through conversation, through humor, intelligence, shared interests. And while those things matter, there is another system at work beneath all of it. A faster, more instinctive system that reacts before logic has time to catch up. This system is part of what psychologists often refer to as the emotional brain. It evaluates situations based on feeling, not reasoning. And physical contact, especially something as direct as a hug, goes straight to this system without asking for permission. So before Lauren even has time to think, he seems nice, her body has already answered a different set of questions. Does he feel steady? Does he seem confident? Do I feel comfortable in his presence? These answers don't come from words. They come from sensation. That's why a hug matters more than most people realize. Now here's something important to understand. This isn't about perfection. Ryan, like most men, was never taught how to think about physical interaction in this way. Society gives plenty of advice on what to say, how to dress, how to act, but rarely explains how small physical cues can shape someone's perception instantly. So if you've ever felt unsure in these moments, it's not because you're doing something wrong on purpose. It's because no one ever showed you what actually matters. Let's go a little deeper. When Lauren experiences that brief hug, her reaction is not something she consciously analyzes. She doesn't step back and think, that hug lacked presence, or that felt uncertain. Instead, she simply feels something comfortable, neutral, or slightly off. And that feeling stays. This is what makes these moments so powerful. They don't just pass and disappear. They leave an impression, even if it's subtle. In Ryan's case, his hug was quick and somewhat hesitant. His arms didn't fully engage. His posture stayed slightly distant, and there was a sense of uncertainty in the movement. To him, it felt polite and respectful. But to Lauren's subconscious, it communicated something else. Not confidence. Not grounded presence. Just uncertainty. Again, she doesn't label it this way. She just feels it. And this is where many men unintentionally create distance without realizing why. They focus on what they say next. They try to be engaging, funny, interesting. But the first impression has already been shaped by something much simpler and much faster. A moment of physical contact. Now let's be clear about something. This isn't about turning a hug into something overly calculated or unnatural. It's not about memorizing steps or trying to perform a perfect interaction. It's about awareness. Understanding that even the smallest actions carry meaning. And when you understand that, your behavior naturally begins to change, not because you're forcing it, but because you're more present. Let's return to the idea of presence for a moment. Presence is not about dominance or control. It's about being fully there in the moment. When you interact with someone, your attention is not scattered. Your body language, your movement, your energy, all aligned with what you're doing. In a hug, this becomes very clear. Are you stepping in with intention? Are you grounded or slightly hesitant? Are you relaxed or tense? These details may seem minor, but they are exactly what the emotional brain picks up on. And here's something even more interesting. People are highly sensitive to this kind of information, even if they can't explain it. Lauren may walk away from that interaction thinking Ryan is nice, but not particularly memorable. She may not know why. She may not even connect it to the hug. But the feeling remains. And feelings, more than anything else, shape how we remember people. This is why two men can say the exact same words, behave in similar ways, and yet leave completely different impressions. Because one of them understands presence, and the other does not. So as you think about your own experiences, consider this. How many moments have passed where something small created a lasting impression, either positive or negative, without you fully realizing it? That's the level at which real connection operates. Not just through what is said, but through what is felt. And a hug, simple as it seems, is one of the clearest ways that feeling is communicated. In the next part, we'll break down the most common mistakes men make in these moments. Mistakes that seem harmless but can completely change how they are perceived. Because once you understand what to avoid, you begin to see exactly where things go wrong. And more importantly, how to get them right. Now that you understand how powerful a simple hug can be, it's time to look at where most men go wrong. And here's the surprising part. It's usually not something obvious. It's not a dramatic failure or an awkward moment that stands out. It's small, subtle mistakes that happen automatically, almost without thinking. Let's go back to Ryan and Austin. After that first introduction with Lauren, they continue talking throughout the evening. From the outside, everything seems fine. The conversation flows, there's some laughter, and nothing feels uncomfortable. But underneath the surface, something is slightly off. And Ryan can't quite figure out why. What he doesn't realize is that the first impression created by his initial physical interaction is still influencing how Lauren feels around him. This is where understanding mistakes becomes crucial. Because in most cases, it's not what you do intentionally that creates distance. It's what you do without awareness. Let's start with the first and most common issue, the weak hug. You've seen it before. Maybe you've even done it yourself. It's the kind of hug where there's barely any real contact. The arms come forward but they don't fully engage. The body stays slightly back, as if there's an invisible barrier in between. Sometimes it's just one arm, like a quick side gesture meant to be polite rather than meaningful. Ryan's first hug with Lauren had elements of this. He didn't want to come across as too forward, so he held back. His intention was to be respectful. But the result was something else entirely. Because a weak hug doesn't communicate respect. It communicates uncertainty. From a psychological perspective, this kind of interaction signals hesitation. It suggests that you're not fully comfortable in your own actions. And while that might not be your intention, it's often how it's perceived on an emotional level. Lauren didn't consciously think that was a weak hug, but she felt a slight lack of confidence. A subtle sense that Ryan wasn't fully grounded in the moment. And again, that feeling stays. Now let's move to the opposite extreme, the overly forceful hug. This is where some men try to compensate for uncertainty by going too far in the other direction. Instead of holding back, they apply too much pressure. They hold on too long, or they move too quickly without reading the situation. Imagine another man at the same gathering. Let's call him Marcus, 37 years old. When he greets someone, his hug is firm but not in a controlled way. It feels rushed, slightly overwhelming, and lasts just a bit longer than it should. From his perspective, he's being confident. But from the other person's perspective, it feels like too much. This kind of hug can create discomfort because it crosses an unspoken boundary. It doesn't allow space for the other person to feel at ease. Instead, it creates tension. And tension is the opposite of connection. Lauren has experienced this type of hug before too, and her reaction is immediate, not through thought but through instinct. A slight tightening of her posture, a subtle step back afterward, a quiet sense of relief when the moment ends. Again, she may not explain it in words, but she feels it clearly. Now let's talk about the third mistake, which is often the most overlooked, the distracted hug. This is what happens when your body is present, but your attention is somewhere else. You go through the motion, but your mind is not fully engaged. Maybe you're thinking about what to say next. Maybe you're scanning the room. Maybe you're slightly tense without realizing it. Ryan actually does this later in the evening when saying goodbye to another guest. His arms wrap around briefly, but his eyes shift away, his posture tightens, and the moment ends abruptly. To him it feels normal. To the other person it feels empty. Because presence is not just physical. It's mental and emotional as well. When someone senses that you're not fully there, it creates a disconnect. It's subtle, but it matters. It can leave the impression that the interaction was automatic rather than intentional. And intention is what gives meaning to any form of connection. Now, here's something important to understand. None of these mistakes are extreme. They're not dramatic failures that stand out immediately. They're small misalignments between intention and execution, between what you feel and what you express. But those small misalignments add up. And over time they shape how people perceive you. Ryan, for example, didn't do anything obviously wrong. He was polite, respectful, and socially appropriate. But the combination of hesitation, slight inconsistency, and lack of full presence created an impression that was neutral. Not negative, but not memorable either. And in many social situations, neutral is the same as forgettable. Now let's take a step back. The goal here is not to criticize or overanalyze every interaction. It's to bring awareness to something most people never consider. Because once you become aware of these patterns, you begin to notice them, not just in yourself but in others as well. You start to see the difference between someone who is fully present and someone who is not. You feel the difference between a gesture that is intentional and one that is automatic. And that awareness changes everything. It allows you to adjust naturally, without forcing anything. It helps you become more grounded in your actions, more aligned in your behavior. And most importantly, it helps you create interactions that feel real. Because at the end of the day, connection is not built on perfection. It's built on authenticity. But authenticity requires awareness. And awareness begins with understanding what not to do. In the next part, we'll shift the focus from mistakes to solutions, what a strong, grounded, and natural hug actually looks like, and why it creates such a different impact. Because once you understand that, you'll never approach these moments the same way again. So what does a good hug actually look like? Not the awkward kind, not the overwhelming kind, and definitely not the distracted kind, but the one that leaves a lasting positive impression without saying a single word. This is where everything comes together, and where most men finally understand that physical interaction is less about technique and more about intention, presence, and awareness. Let's look at an example. There's a man named Ryan, 34 years old, living in San Diego. Ryan isn't the loudest guy in the room. He doesn't rely on flashy behavior or over-the-top gestures. But one thing people consistently notice about him is how comfortable they feel around him. And surprisingly, a big part of that comes down to something as simple as the way he hugs. When Ryan goes in for a hug, he doesn't hesitate. There's no awkward pause, no second-guessing. He steps forward naturally, as if the moment is already decided. That alone communicates something important: certainty. Not arrogance, not pressure, just a calm sense of, this is normal. This is natural. His posture matters too. His feet are firmly grounded, his shoulders relaxed but upright. He's not leaning in awkwardly or overreaching. His body language is balanced, which quietly signals emotional stability. And whether people realize it or not, that stability is what makes others feel at ease. Now, pay attention to the placement of his hands. One hand rests gently between the upper back and shoulder area, while the other settles comfortably around the mid-back. There's no grabbing, no unnecessary movement, just a steady, respectful hold. It's firm enough to feel real, but never so tight that it becomes uncomfortable. And here's a detail that most people overlook completely. He breathes. That might sound simple, but it changes everything. When someone holds their breath during a hug, their body becomes tense. That tension transfers instantly. But when someone breathes calmly, their body stays relaxed, and that calmness spreads to the other person. It's subtle, almost invisible, but incredibly powerful. The timing is just as important. Ryan doesn't rush the moment, but he also doesn't drag it out. The hug lasts around 2 to 4 seconds, just enough time for the other person to register the connection, to feel the presence, and to relax into it briefly. Then, he lets go naturally. And this part, how he ends the hug, is just as important as how he starts it. Instead of pulling away abruptly, he releases gradually. There's a smooth transition, sometimes with a slight movement of his hands down the arms as he steps back. He maintains brief eye contact, offers a relaxed smile, and then continues the interaction as if everything flowed seamlessly. Nothing feels forced. Nothing feels rehearsed. And that's exactly why it works. Because at its core, a good hug isn't about following a rigid formula. It's about alignment, your body, your intention, and your attention all working together in the same direction. Let's break down why this matters so much. In everyday life, people are constantly reading each other on a subconscious level. Long before words are processed, the brain is already picking up signals. Posture, tone, timing, and touch. These signals form impressions almost instantly. A hug, in particular, bypasses a lot of the usual filters. It's direct. It's immediate. And it gives the other person a quick but powerful sense of who you are. If your hug is uncertain, they feel uncertainty. If your hug is overwhelming, they feel discomfort. If your hug lacks presence, they feel distance. But when your hug is calm, grounded, and genuine, they feel safe. They feel respected. And most importantly, they feel that you are fully present in the moment. And here's the interesting part, people remember how you made them feel, even if they can't explain why. Ryan doesn't analyze this every time he hugs someone. He's not running through a checklist in his head. Instead, he simply focuses on being present, on respecting the moment, and on letting his actions match his intention. That's what creates consistency. And consistency is what builds trust. Now, does this mean every hug needs to be perfect? Of course not. Human interaction isn't about perfection. It's about awareness. It's about understanding the impact of small details and adjusting naturally over time. What matters is that you stop treating physical interaction as something automatic or meaningless. Because it's not. Even the smallest gesture can carry weight when it's done with intention. So the next time you go in for a hug, don't overthink it, but don't ignore it either. Stand grounded. Stay relaxed. Be present. Let the moment happen naturally, but make sure you're actually in that moment when it does. Because in the end, a hug is never just a hug. It's a quiet message. And when done right, it says everything without needing a single word. Now that you understand what works and what doesn't, let's talk about something even deeper. The long-term impact of these small moments and why something as simple as a hug can shape how people remember you. Most men think attraction, connection, or even respect is built through big gestures, expensive dates, impressive achievements, or perfectly crafted words. But the truth is much simpler and, at the same time, much more subtle. It's built through repeated emotional impressions. And those impressions are often created in quiet, almost invisible moments. A hug is one of those moments. Think about a man named Jason, 38 years old, living in New York City. Jason has a busy life, career responsibilities, constant movement. He's met many people over the years, had countless conversations, attended events, and built a wide social circle. But when he reflects on the people he truly remembers, it's rarely because of what they said. It's because of how they made him feel. There was one woman he met briefly at a small gathering. They didn't talk for long, maybe just a few minutes. Nothing extraordinary was said. But when they greeted each other and later said goodbye, there was a moment. A simple hug that stood out. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't overly emotional. But it was real. She was present, relaxed, fully engaged in that brief interaction. And even though the moment lasted only a few seconds, it left a clear impression. Not because of technique, but because of authenticity. That's what most people miss. A hug, when done with awareness, becomes a kind of emotional signature. It tells the other person, I'm here. I see you. This moment matters. And when that message is delivered clearly, even without words, it stays with them. Now flip the perspective. Imagine how many forgettable interactions happen every day. Quick, distracted greetings. Half-hearted gestures. Moments where people go through the motions without truly being present. These interactions don't leave a mark. They fade almost instantly. Why? Because there's no emotional weight behind them. And that brings us to a powerful realization. People don't remember actions, they remember feelings. The action is just the vehicle. The feeling is what stays. This is why mastering something as simple as a hug can quietly set you apart. Not in a loud, attention-seeking way, but in a grounded, consistent way that builds trust over time. Let's go back to Jason for a second. Over the years, he started to notice a pattern. The people he felt most comfortable around weren't necessarily the most talkative or the most impressive. They were the ones who were fully present in small moments. Whether it was a handshake, a hug, or even eye contact, there was a sense of calm and certainty in how they interacted. And that consistency made them stand out. So what does this mean for you? It means you don't need to overcomplicate things. You don't need to memorize techniques or try to control every detail. What you need is awareness. Awareness of your body. Awareness of your energy. Awareness of whether you're truly present in the moment or just going through the motions. Because the difference between a forgettable interaction and a meaningful one often comes down to that single factor: presence. When you're present, your actions align naturally. Your body language becomes more relaxed. Your timing feels right. Your movements are smoother. And most importantly, the other person feels it. When you're not present, even the correct actions can feel off. A technically perfect hug can still feel empty if your mind is elsewhere. And people pick up on that instantly. So instead of focusing on perfection, focus on connection. Instead of trying to impress, focus on being real. Instead of thinking, am I doing this right? Start asking, am I actually here right now? Because in the end, that's what separates memorable men from forgettable ones. Not looks, not money, not lines or strategies, but the ability to create genuine moments of connection, even in something as simple as a hug. And here's the final truth most people never realize. Every interaction you have is a small opportunity to show who you are. Not through words, but through presence, through consistency, through the way you make others feel in those brief, everyday moments. You don't need to change everything overnight. Just start paying attention to the details that most people ignore. Because once you do, you'll notice something shift. People will respond differently. Conversations will feel smoother. Connections will feel more natural. And without forcing anything, you'll start leaving a stronger impression wherever you go. All from something as simple and as powerful as a hug.